Hey guys, how you doing? jpsarrireviews here, and welcome again to another book review. And in today's review, we're going to cover Excalibur. Now, this cover is for the direct market, and it is my favorite. I really like the issue number 1, which is the cover for the regular version. Still a fantastic, iconic cover, but I do like this one. So I went with this one. This is Alan Davis and Paul Neary. They are the artists here. This is from Marvel Age. On the side of the dust jacket, you have the Marvel Omnibus logo as usual. You have the Excalibur logo. You have number 1, number 2 is coming very soon, and you have an image of Megan. On the back of the dust jacket, you read the sword is drawn, a new legend is born. You have all the covers, many amazing covers here. This collects Excalibur Special Edition number 1, Excalibur number 1 to 34, Excalibur Mojo Mayhem, Quasar number 11, Thor 427 to 429, and also collects Marvel Comics Presents 31 to 38, some excerpts of that particular run. Inside of the dust jacket, on the left side, you have an introduction. It says the light in the darkness of fear and hate. And here we have the creators, so it includes Alan Davis and Chris Claremont. One of the most amazing things about this collection is the book cover. I love the spread here. This is a poster by Alan Davis and Paul Neary. An amazing art here. Now, when you're looking at the binding, you can see this huge eye, which it's a benefit in the sense that you have less gutter loss. It is a bad thing because these big eyes normally, after a while, they can also break. And if they break, then you have a big problem, you know, with loose pages. So hopefully that doesn't happen with this book, but I've seen that before. When opening the book, you see this orange first page, which I like the choice of color here. Then you have Excalibur, this image. This is actually a cover by Ron Lim. And here you have King Arthur and, of course, the members of Excalibur. Here we have, of course, the writers and the pencilers. On the writing chops, you have Chris Claremont, you have Michael Higgins, Terry Austin, Dana Moreshead, Scott Lobdell, Mike Gruenwald, Tom Defalco, Alan Davis, Seth Krufkaw, and Ron Frenz. On the pencils, you have Alan Davis, who is the most important artist in this collection. You had Ron Lim, Marshall Rogers, Arthur Adams, Dennis Jensen, Rick Leonardi, Chris Wozniak, Barry Windsor-Smith, Colleen Doran, Dave Ross, Ron Wagner, Erik Larsen, Mike Manley, and Ron Frenz. On the inks, you have Paul Neary, who is a phenomenal companion to Alan Davis as an inker. He's also a fantastic artist. You have Rubenstein, Terry Austin, Al Milgrom, Bill Sienkiewicz, Bret Blevins, Ron Wagner, Fred Fredericks, and Joe Sinnott. And of course, there's many others. Now, in the table of contents, everything starts on the Excalibur Special Edition in 1987. The sword is drawn. This is the start of this collection. And then it goes all the way, of course, in 1988, the following year, you have issue number 1 that goes all the way to 1991 with issue number 34. It also includes stories from Marvel Comics Presents from issue number 31 to issue number 38. This happened in 1989. It also includes special guest appearances in other comics for like Quasar number 11 and Thor 427 to 429. Alright guys, now we're looking at the first cover of Excalibur, which is in this case Excalibur number 1. The sword is drawn by Claremont and Davis. Of course, Neary was also the inker here. And this is a phenomenal cover. I really love this. This is in the aftermath of the mutant massacre and the fall of the mutants. And the thing about Excalibur is there was some characters, of course, some of them mostly came from Captain Britain, but some of the characters, of course, from the X-Men. But these characters brought together, they were very different in so many ways, but also I think they complemented each other. It was a perfect union of weirdness at the same time in this book that it was really fascinating. And when you look at Alan Davis' art here, it's such an introduction. I remember looking at this spread page here, and I was super impressed with it. He started actually in the early 80s as a professional artist. But he wasn't interested. Alan Davis wasn't interested in drawing comics, but he has such a natural talent, and the way he does things is very different from the way we were accustomed in the American market. You have to realize this. Many of these characters, starting with Captain Britain, they came from the Marvel UK imprint, which was very different. They were producing their own comics in the UK, and it was a very different time. I love his pencils, the way he does the expressions. You know, the way he does grief, you know, like for example, here, Captain Britain, Brian Braddock, he's just crying, he's just suffering the loss of his sister, who is Psylocke, for those who do not know, Betsy Braddock. Also in Muir Island, you have Nightcrawler and Kitty Pryde recovering of their injuries after the events of the fall of the mutants. So they are unaware that the X-Men survived, their friends survived, so they think they're the only people left. Now, this is Gatecrasher. I always love her design. She's the leader of Technic, who are bounty hunters, interdimensional bounty hunters. Phenomenal stories. Everything comes from Captain Britain, and I'm so glad that Captain Britain Omnibus is coming very soon, the reprint of it. And it is a must, really, to understand Captain Britain. Because to be honest with you, when you read the stories, I was unfamiliar with Captain Britain at that time when I started reading this back in the early 90s. This came out in 1987. But I started really reading this in I would say between 1989 and 1990. That's when I started reading these comics. To me, Captain Britain was a jerk. You know, the whole story here you're going to see, and you're going to think that Captain Britain is a jerk. But you have to know the inside of the character and everything that is pretty much happening in his life there, because everything is coming, of course, from his comic book that started in the Marvel UK imprint and then, of course, developed into other things, even in the American market. But here you have this. I always hated these guys, you know, the werewolves who come in from, you know, they are the agents of Mojo. But the art here, when you look at the art and the colors that were chosen here, it is really, really good. Of course, this is Rachel Summers, the Phoenix. She's the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey from an alternate reality, an alternate future. And she's a big part of the story here. Of course, the werewolves are after her. And in the whole process that she's trying to run away from them, of course, she meets all these characters, all these members of the, you know, former teams, of course, the X-Men, and they all come together and, you know, they help each other out. But the art of Alan Davis, you know, like I was telling you earlier, Alan Davis is such a fantastic artist. He started with fanzines in the UK, and then he started moving into other things. He started working with Marvel UK early on, and then, of course, came to America. And in America, he started working I think his big break in America started with DC Comics, started with Batman and the Outsiders, and then with Detective Comics. And I think he was becoming very popular to the point that even Chris Claremont, who is actually born in London, but he's been raised in the United States, so, you know, he holds dual citizenship. He invited him to come over to start doing stuff with the X-Men and the New Mutants, and he started working there, and that led into working in these pages. Of course, he already was working in the UK, and he got popular when he was working with Alan Moore doing Captain Britain. And the important thing is this: people were not only falling in love with these comics because of the writing, they were falling in love with this because of the art. Because the art was extremely, extremely different. It was unique for the time. You know, we're talking about early 90s, you know, late 80s, early 90s. So there's a lot of different artists. There's that changes in the industry. Some artists are really setting a foundation for what the 90s would be. And I think there are artists that they still have some unique, mature look in the way they do certain things. And of course, this is what they decided to come together. Love this spread. Love this page here. Look fantastic. All the characters. And I'm telling you, from all the people that have drawn Nightcrawler, my favorite up to this day has always been Alan Davis. I love the way he does Nightcrawler. Phenomenal. Also Kitty Pryde. She looks really hot there. You know, he's really good with the anatomy. Now we have Widget, their companion, who's going to be a big part of this story here. This is the cover that is included on the book market, on the regular market. This is the one that you're going to find the most now, and this is, you know, it's still a fantastic cover. I love it. I was really turned into going for this one or the direct market. I went for the direct market, but I still love this one. It is iconic. Now, you got to keep in mind, I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were very careful in the things that we watched, the things that we read, so they didn't allow me to do a lot of things when I was a kid. But, you know, as a kid, you know, you find ways. My father also grew up reading comics, so he was a big fan of comics. He introduced me to many comics. Some of them were a bit more mature, even as a young kid. But it was fun to read comics, you know, during that time. My mother was not so crazy about it. You know, she wasn't crazy about some certain things. You know, she didn't allow me to do certain things. She will always look at some of my comics, make sure that they have content that she would approve, even though she couldn't understand what was going on there. Love this right here. Phoenix looks amazing. I love these spreads that they're always very included in these comics. So, and I always love how funny some of these covers were. You know, this is the thing with Alan Davis. The way he enticed you to go into the story, covers are so important. They entice you to go in. The best part of it is that he's doing the covers, but at the same time, the interior art is matching the cover, which is something that, unfortunately, sometimes a lot of comic book companies don't do. They have a cover artist, but when you go into the inside art, it's someone totally different. And the quality of that is not the same. It kind of goes down, you know, to a degree that you feel like I've been cheated. You know, this is not the case here. To me, this was something very different and unique. And even though I was, as a Christian kid, I was not always intrigued by things that they were esoteric or, you know, magic and stuff like that, that I considered witchcraft, things like that. I was always drawn to some of those things. You know, I love things like that, the Ghostbusters. I love all those aspects of the 80s. You know, I love the stories. You know, I love some elements of horror. I even read some horror stories when I was a teenager because I was intrigued by them. You know, there's always this, I think probably it's always the hunger, or maybe the desire, or even the questions that we have in regards to the unknown, the things that we do not understand. So to me, this was attractive. And when I came to it, you know, it was at the beginning, it was strange because there's a lot of things here that I was like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. You know, but as you read the stories, you realize that if you're trying to read Excalibur with the mindset of, oh, you have to understand everything that is happening here, then you're gonna miss the point of the stories. And at this time, you know, when you look at the history of the X-Men during these years, the X-Men, they have a lot of drama. There was a lot of situations in their life that were just like very heavy laden. There was like, you know, there was a lot of things where you feel like, man, are they gonna catch a break? So you were like, okay, you know, these characters, you know, they have unique personalities. They're very different. You might think that they will not work together, but the way that Chris Claremont was doing the stories here, they just were perfect matches for each other. You know, they were perfect companions to each other. Now, there's a kind of like a love triangle at the beginning of the story. Brian Braddock and Megan are a couple. And one thing I love about Megan is that she was very innocent. You know, she has this innocence because of her upbringing, because of the way she was pretty much kept by her family away from the world. So she is very timid at times, but also very open in others. She is just open, you know, she is, empathetic, you know, she really feels the emotions and she feeds from those emotions around her. And at the beginning, I'm telling you, Brian was an a-hole to her all the time. He was really mean. Of course, he was dealing with grief, but at the same time, he was taking that grief on her. And at that point, you have Nightcrawler, and to be honest with you, I wanted for Nightcrawler to end up with Megan. That's what I wanted, but you know, you have to read the stories to keep going, you know, to really understand what really happened. But this is the thing about Chris Claremont's writing, that it really, everything he does is more like a soap opera, and Excalibur had those elements that also were part of X-Men, you know, the soap opera elements, the love triangles, the frustration, the people being together as a team but also not sometimes getting along. Those things were important. Here you see Megan looking gorgeous as always with the animals. She's definitely always close to nature. But the covers, these are funny covers. I was just impressed. These covers, when they were coming out, every time they were coming out, I remember I used to go to the comic book shop and I was like, I love that. You know, I love that. This is the way you sell a comic, through the covers. Knowing that Alan Davis was the one in charge of it was the best part. So there's a lot of wackiness, a lot of craziness happening here. A lot of these characters, interdimensional travels that we're going to see throughout the story, and it gets freaky. I'm telling you, it gets freaky at times, but it is the fun aspect of that. And this is the thing, if you come here, and I read some people reviewing this, I read some reviews online, and a lot of people that have never read this, they didn't experience this when it came out, they're very critical about some aspects of the story. And I'm telling you, you're critical because you're having these goggles that when you're reading the stories, you're bringing the X-Men goggles on it. You have to kind of take that away. Yes, it's an offshoot of the X-Men, but it's its own thing. And when you come with less expectations about the story and just willing to go for the ride, definitely you're going to enjoy that. Now look at these faces. Look at the monsters here. They look kind of demonic for sure. And some people, this is something that my mother would never approve. When she sees this cover, she would be like, no, this is going out. But hey, I kept going anyway. Now, I want to talk about Paul Neary because sometimes I just talk about the pencilers, but also the inkers are so important. Paul Neary started in the 70s in the UK. He started actually in Warren Publishing doing Eerie comics and then other comics. Then he was working on 2000 AD. Phenomenal. He's not only a penciler, a writer, an inker. He was at some point in the 90s also an editor for Marvel UK. The same way you see Jim Lee and Scott Williams or John Byrne and Terry Austin, there's always a definitive inker for an artist, in my opinion. And in this case, I will tell you, Paul Neary was a definitive inker and still is a definitive inker for Alan Davis. Now, this is a storyline where, of course, they're going to New York and they're trapped in the events of Inferno. And here Megan, of course, because there's so much evil in the air, definitely she grabs and gravitates towards it. The stories here definitely were wacky, you know, and there are elements here, for example, look at these vehicles. Kind of reminds me of some issues of the Ghostbusters. Really like that. They transform it into these demonic beings. I really like it. It reminds me of the Ghostbusters cartoon. And here you see the Crazy Gang. Now, this is a fantastic cover for sure. You see all these demons in the back, everything. Of course, this is not something my mother would approve. but it was so intriguing. It was an interesting cover for sure. When you look at artists from the UK, you have to realize that what there is allowed in the UK in comparison to America, what was allowed before, they give them room to do a lot of things that were unexpected and unique. I think when they came into the American market was already hungry for more mature content in the 80s. In the 70s, a lot of creators were kind of moving around the Code Authority to kind of bring some stories and, you know, give you hints of things. But the 80s brought a lot more maturity and elements that in so many ways were not permitted prior to it. And it was an interesting time. Now we have this cover by Ron Lim. This is early in his career. This is when he started doing the Silver Surfer stuff, and he's coming to do some of these issues here. You know, I'll tell you, initially Ron Lim, I wasn't totally impressed with him. I love some of his art. Definitely his very early 90s style. And Ron Lim was a big part of that era. You know, started in 1988, then we started doing stuff with Marvel. He's a great artist, but I don't think he was meant to do this. It's not his style. I think Alan Davis was the perfect artist to bring the craziness of these characters. I love the way Alan draws women. I think they're very feminine. They're very womanly, if you call it like that. The women, of course, they have curves, which is always an important part of it. You know, the reason you're attracted to them, they're beautiful. But they're not just like, you know, like in some other artists that they do when they draw women, they tend to be more on the slim side, more like in the athletic side. Everyone is different. Some of them are more muscular. Nowadays, we get to see a lot of muscular women in comics, which, you know, I'm not against it. It's just the way artists are just defining the medium. Now, this is the late Marshall Rogers working here, and I gotta be honest with you, I was never impressed with this art. Of course, you know, I'm just talking about the pages here. He did all the things with DC and Marvel over the years. I wasn't impressed, and Terry Austin is the one doing the inking, and Terry Austin, of course, he's a phenomenal inker. And a lot of the stuff that you see here is Terry Austin fixing some of the lines that, in my opinion, were not done well, particularly on the backgrounds and stuff. He's doing fantastic. Not impressed. I was never impressed. And, you know, at the end of the day, we all have our preferences. And, you know, I love the fact that sometimes some comic book stories have guest artists, and sometimes some guest artists are amazing. But for the most part, when you grow accustomed to an artist, you just want to stick with that artist. Now here we have Excalibur Mojo making, and this is the art of Arthur Adams, which in my opinion it's always been fantastic. And this is a story kind of like a homage to the Days of the Future Past, where Kitty Pryde is trying to save the X-Babies. In Arthur Adams, his art was fascinating for sure, still is fascinating. His cover art is fascinating, but he is also a very good, you know, inside artist. And look at Mojo, that expression, the face. Mojo is such a character, man. I'm telling you, such a character. And this is a big part of the book. You know, it takes a big chunk of it because of the story. But it's really cool, and I love the fact that it's included here. I really do. I would love to see an X-Babies omnibus at some point. That would be awesome too. Now you're looking at the Cross Time Caper, which is a story where they are traveling through different dimensions, trying to get back home to their own dimension. And this is when it gets really, really weird. And this is the one that, you know, I think what really kept me going through it was, of course, the art of Alan Davis. And, you know, in some ways, when you read the stories, of course, you know, you can say that Claremont is very wordy. He adds a lot of dialogue and all of that, but the art was really good. And I will tell you that Davis was really keeping up with it. This is a great cover right there. That spread is pretty cool and very funny at the same time. Again, you know, the way he did the covers was always amazing. They're fighting on some different versions of the Avengers and all that. It's just very quirky. And at the same time, it's fun. Here you can see Galactus and a different version of the Fantastic Four. Here's Jamie Braddock, who is the brother of Brian Braddock and Betsy Braddock. He's the older brother, and he's technically an evil guy. He's a villain that comes from the Captain Britain stories. So he's gonna be a big part of the storyline here. And here you can see, man, she looks great. Saturnine looks really hot right there. Now, I love this cover. This is a phenomenal cover. This is a homage to Warlords of Mars. Homage really to that era, you know, the era when you saw Francetta, the era of Joe Kubert. Those fantastic covers. They were amazing. That blew your mind. The Tarzan era, all of that stuff, you know, the John Carter. I love that. This is the thing, what I love about this covers and the way, in this case, Davis was doing it. It's just, he was paying homage to a lot of things in a really nice and a really fantastic way. So they go through this universe that is pretty much a homage to Warlords of Mars, and it's just fascinating. I love what they're doing here. I love it. Here's the Saturnine from that particular dimension being very seductive with Nightcrawler. And definitely, these are the elements are very mature, as you can see in the story. But man, when you see the drawing, when you see the style, you can see why it's that Alan Davis was so beloved in this comic book. He knew how to do women for sure. He is fantastic. Now here we have Bob Wysick in the covers, who does an interesting art. I wasn't crazy about that art either. And here we have in the pencils Dennis Jensen as the guest penciler. You know, Dennis is fine. You know, he does some good stuff, but again, this is not what I was impressed when I was going through this book. And here we have Rick Leonardi and Al Milgrom in this cover. And Rick Leonardi does the interior art. You have to keep in mind that the way they saw the world 20, 30, 40 years ago is very different than the way we see it now. So you have to take those glasses of today when you're looking at these characters. Here is Ron Lim, amazing. I love this one here. So you have to take the glasses of today's day and really look at the comics from that perspective, from the perspective of that time. And to be honest, you know, they were innovating, they were changing things, they were opening the conversation to talk about other serious matter that during that time. And yes, you might think that they're very archaic in the way they're doing this stuff, and the way they're doing it, or the ideas they throw at you, but at the same time, it was changing the way we were seeing and perceiving things in one way. You know, you cannot bring change 100% just by force. You have to kind of slowly, you have to really push it in, and that's what they were doing with the comics here. The Shadow King and Emma Frost right there being slave. Some of those elements you will not really accept. The people today will not accept, but you know, keep in mind, this is just the time, you know, the way it was drawn, the way it was written, the way the stories were evolving during that time. I love this one because it's a homage to Judge Dredd for sure, here in the story. And I love this cover, one of my favorite covers in this run for sure. Look how hot she looks. Kitty Pryde looks really hot right there. And this story is very good. And again, you know, every time you feel like you want to give up the book because the artist is not as good or the art is not as impressive, then you have Alan Davis back, and that kept you going. Now, this is one thing I love about this book, is the special cameos, the funny cameos. And here we have no other than John Byrne dressing as Superman. He's a chubby version of Superman. Really like that. It's not the only time you see this in the book. Here's another one on issue 14 that I skipped, but I went back just to show you. This is Chris Claremont right here, and this is another version of John Byrne. Now, he wearing the A because at that time he was doing the Avengers, and of course you know that that's Chris Claremont because he has the X. But going back to the stories here, as you can see, like, man, I'm telling you, it's fascinating. The powers, the different characters that they confront, the battles that they go through, the different variations. Like, for example, you can see with Lockheed, of course this is a bigger version of Lockheed, who's actually the one powering this train that they're pretty much using to travel, and there they have the confrontation with Galactus. And this is Chris Wozniak, and I will tell you, in my opinion, that I would have preferred to see again Alan Davis doing this. And to me, it seems that this review has become more like an Alan Davis praise. And some people would say, well, you're just a fanboy. And yes, I am a fanboy. That's the reason I buy these books first, because I'm a fan. You know, I love the stories that are included here. And, you know, every artist has potential. Every artist has the power to change the world, for sure, in my opinion. Art has the power to change the world. So it's in the hands of the artist. And the artist really changed the world as we saw it. And we are really taking that nowadays with all these characters that have been kept alive through this art. And now we're getting to see the results of that through the movies. All of that is fantastic. I would love to see an Excalibur movie. Even a TV show, I would love to see Excalibur being represented. Another one that, in my opinion, is an iconic artist, which is Barry Windsor-Smith. And then the inks, you get Bill Sienkiewicz. Amazing too. You know, and I will tell you, when back in those years, I wasn't always crazy about Barry Windsor-Smith. I wasn't always crazy about him. I find his art and even Bill Sienkiewicz's art very murky. But over time, you realize, as you grow and as you become older, you realize what they were trying to achieve, and the impression that they have and the inspiration they were using in order to create their art. And to be honest with you, art evolves and changes, and also our understanding, our appreciation of it also matures, and we become more accepting of this. You know, now I'm in my 40s, I'm more accepting of a lot of the artists that back in the day I wasn't too crazy about. For example, here we have Colleen Doran. Colleen Doran was utilized a lot back in the late 80s, early 90s. She did a lot of stuff then. And to be honest with you, I was never impressed with her art. It was not something that caught my attention as much. And every time she was brought as a guest artist, I was always let down. I didn't like her. However, Colleen Doran, over the years, she has continued with her career, and she's still active, and she does amazing art now. So ultimately, you have to see the potential in the artist. For example, this is a nice figure right there, and her faces are very unique. They have a very classy style. Of course, when you're young, you're impressed by the lines, you're impressed by the explosiveness of the panels and all of that. And some artists, they really catch that really well. And you have your favorites, but as you get old, as you grow old, then you realize that art is subjective. And art evolves, it changes constantly. It's really subjective to the mind, and we all have different opinions about art, but also our opinion changes with time. We're not permanent. Our way of thinking is not always permanent. Now here we have David Ross and Alan Milgrom doing the art. The writer is Dana Moreshead, and this is more of a darker take on the characters. Now one thing I will tell you here, there was a lot of dark colors. Some of this kind of reminds me a little bit of early stages of Hellboy, some of that. Now, this is an interesting story here, and I really like this story here. The Girls' School from Heck. And this is a storyline where Kitty Pryde ends up in a girls' school, and it becomes a very interesting, intriguing story. I will tell you that the art wasn't bad. I think the art was good. Of course, it wasn't Alan Davis. But what really impressed me of this, of course, was the storyline, how funny it was, and the artist here, who is Ron Wagner, was doing some amazing lines. I love that, and definitely some of the color choices they had here were really well done. And I would say Ron is a fantastic artist, and the way he does some of the expressions, some of the panel layout and women. I love also they have these panels where everything was a bit darker. I think it really was well done here because this represents the middle of the dark there at night. So you see like the colors and the effects of night. And Ron does women. It's a natural look, which I love. I love that. I love when artists have the natural look. It's not excessive. It's not voluptuous. It's just a natural woman, and they are a bit athletic. So, some artists, they do it well. Some artists don't do it so good. What I like about this story, of course, is that you see Kitty Pryde really having to fend for herself while other things are happening also, back at Excalibur, back at the lighthouse. And here you can see a very revealing Nightcrawler. Back in those years, I remember that. We used to wear that stuff, the Speedos, back in the 80s. And then, of course, in the 90s, people started wearing the shorts and stuff. It was a different time. I'm telling you, things were so different back then. And I have to be honest with you, I haven't used a Speedo since I was a kid. So I'm not like going back to it. And here you can see they're in the middle of the dark. So everything is dark. I love the choices here. This makes sense. I love this first page. Always love the first page just like this, where they have big opening. And to be honest, this story is good because you see Kitty Pryde, really being more mature. Something that sometimes we tend to forget with Kitty Pryde back in those years. A lot of the writers, and sometimes she was acting very young, and sometimes she acting very mature. And there are storylines where, in reality, you can get to see and you be reminded that Kitty Pryde was just a child. She was just a teenager. Even though sometimes she acted very mature, and the expectation was that she was very mature, she was still a teenager. And this story goes back to that. Her age, who she is, she still have the same angst of a young teenager, and she has to deal with trying to make friends, and sometimes it's not an easy thing at school. So this was definitely, for the time, was very intriguing, and of course the pencils were really good. I think Ron did really good here. Another aspect of the story that I like about this omnibus as a whole is that it includes all these stories that were part of the Marvel Comics Presents. Now here you have this cover. This is Todd McFarlane. Love this cover. This is John Bogdanove right there on top. And then you have different artists, of course, with the covers. But here you have the storylines. We are having a wild weekend, and each one is a part. One of the characters of Excalibur has to be a part of it. And this one, for example, they have to confront the Looney Tunes, or a version of the Loonies. That's what they call it. And the art here is Erik Larsen. Erik Larsen is the one that does the entirety of the run, in the sense that he is the one that does all the stories. And I've always been a fan of Erik Larsen. I love the wackiness of Erik Larsen when he does this type of thing, something that he continue on, of course, with the Savage Dragon. But here you can see that craziness that he can put on. And sometimes you can see the images of his panel layout can be on disarray. It seems so. But I think he's a great storyteller, even better than Todd McFarlane during that time, even though Todd McFarlane was the one that was most popular. And definitely the way he does his expressions look very cartoony. But he can also, one thing sometimes, the problem that I see with a lot of people that do not follow Erik Larsen, they see the most cartoony style of him. But when he gets to do the more mature stuff, He's very good. He's very good. But I love the way the storytelling here, the way he draws women for sure, and all these loony characters. And another thing that I always mention with Erik Larsen, I love when he makes these lines, which kind of represent movement and speed. I love when he does that. Definitely, it's just cool. He's such a cool artist, very unique with his style, and you know, so 90s in my opinion. Of course, this is already in the early 90s, and look at the spread right here. And now we have the other comics where the Excalibur were guests, and we have Quasar here, and this is the art of Mike Manley, and this is Mark Gruenwald, who is doing the writing. Quasar is a character that definitely, you know, it has its moments. I remember back in the 80s when I was reading the stories, I liked the character, and I think he was important then. When you're thinking about the cosmic characters, I think Quasar deserves a special place there. And here, of course, you know, you can see Rachel Summers, the Phoenix. It also includes the early appearance at the Mighty Thor. And this is Ron Frenz doing the writing, but also the art is Ron Frenz and Tom DeFalco, and then you have Joe Sina doing the inks. And I'm telling you, what I love about Ron Frenz is that when he does this art, he pays homage to the classic era of characters. You're talking about the Jack Kirby era. You're talking about the John Romita Sr. era. Look at this Captain America. This is classic Captain America. And this is in the pretty much in the 90s right here. Sometimes when you think about the 90s, everybody thinks about the 90s, about a particular era. They think about Jim Lee. They think about all those artists, Todd McFarlane. But there were artists that were still trying to keep the same art alive, or at least paying homage to classic art. Classic panels, classic poses, you know, it's cool. To me, it's cool, like this one, this cover, fascinating. When you look at this cover, you would think that this is from back in the 70s or even the late 60s, but no, it's actually, you know, in the early 90s. This is the appearance of the Ghost Rider on this one, phenomenal cover for sure. Again, Joe Sina doing the inks, Ron Frenz doing the art, also Tom DeFalco helping with the writing. Really, I love this, man. I'm telling you, they're fascinating covers, fascinating art. Now we come into the extras. You have the Marvel Age, which is the cover for the direct market. Love this cover, always loved it. Then, of course, you have some editorials. You had Alan Davis on Excalibur, love that. You had the monthly series starts. You also have some of those sketches, which is good, more of those covers. I love that. All these covers are fascinating. The poster that is part of the cover of the book. Here you can see the cover, also the story is drawn, love that. And then you have excerpts from the official handbook, so you have the bios of each character, even the enemies, the crazy gang right there, Excalibur, Megan. I love that, Roma, Saturnine, TechNet. So you get all of this, the Werewolves, Widget, and of course you get more stuff. The content here is amazing, an interview with Chris Wozniak. Now this is a pinup for Marvel Illustrated by Mark Silvestri and Terry Austin. Phenomenal. You can see some of the characters. You can see Rachel Summer, Phoenix. You can see Megan. You can see Kitty Pryde, and some of the, of course, the X-Men. And then of course you got the cards. You got some more covers, homage covers. Love this one too. And here you can see the clean pencils of Alan Davis, but also one thing that really inspires me about this, I really love, is to see Paul Neary inks. Here you can see this is the actual cover that is used for the regular print of this book. And then you get more stuff, more of those. These are covers of the trade paperbacks. All right, guys, what can I say? I'm a big fan of Excalibur. I'm a big fan of this era. Now, would I recommend this to everyone? I will say it depends on your personality. You're the type of person that you like crazy things, wackiness, that you are fascinated by those things, by, you know, you love Doctor Who, and you love all those type of shows, or storylines, all of that. You will love this. This will be something fascinating to you because you pay homage to it. But if you're not like that, you like more action, you like more of a serious tone, then definitely this is not gonna be for you. It's a big part of the history of Marvel Comics in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a fantastic team, one that survived for many years. To me, it still is one of the best storylines, one of the most impactful teams of the time. But what is your opinion, my friends? What do you think about Excalibur? Are you a fan? You grew up with Excalibur? Do you had the chance to read it back then? Or you read it years later? Let me know in the comments below. So once again, my friends, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, to comment, and to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification button to remind you of the next video. Follow me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. The links are down below. And please consider supporting the channel financially through Patreon. My friends, God bless you. Take care. I will talk to you again. Bye-bye.